This is Tim.
And Lily.
And Dave.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo on Facebook with Mulele and with David Dye, whose comics we have talked about on the podcast a couple of times now. He's doing a series called Amazing Tales. David, welcome to the podcast.
Nice to be here. Thanks very much, Tim and Mulele.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever had a guest on Critiquing Comics, so this is something new. Deconstructing Comics, of course, but...
nice to be the first.
So, David, how long have you been making comics?
Probably, I'd say I started when I left the Army in 2011.
I see. What moved you to start making comics?
I started off by doing a graphic history book, which was about the story of Anzac. That got me into doing picture stories.
Okay, and what is Anzac? Just I kind of know, but
all right. Anzac is the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps.
Okay.
And it was formed in World War One, and their first major engagement was a battle at Gallipoli in Turkey, 1915, and that battle has become one of Australia's and New Zealand's most prominent marks in history.
Mm-hmm. That was a bad battle, wasn't it? Like a lot of folks died there.
Yes, that's right.
I read a book about World War One and about Churchill. That Churchill decided to do that, and he was roundly criticized afterwards, I think.
Yeah, well, just about broke him, I think, and might have been what got him kicked out of Parliament for a while.
Right. Yeah, it could have ended his political career altogether, but he came back later. Anyway, so in our last Critiquing Comics episode, which came out on Christmas Day, we talked about Amazing Tales 2 and 3, and we've largely been impressed with your work. But in these two issues, in your Dropship 15 story, there was a thing that sort of bothered us. Mulele in particular, but I was kind of uncomfortable with it too. There were some sort of ape-like characters who were acting and dressing like Islamic terrorists. And after we put up that episode, you very, very graciously responded by email. I want to read the email. Tim and Mulele, thanks once again for critiquing my comics. I appreciate you taking the time to read them and offer your opinions. I was a little concerned about offering these two titles to you for the reasons you pointed out, i.e. RAF. Obviously, I didn't intend it to be construed in that light, but I can see the problems that exist and will endeavor to resolve it in the next story. I'm hoping you haven't written me off and are open to receiving future issues and also a couple of other comics that I've done. So, I guess Mulele and I... Go ahead.
At the outset, I just wanted to answer the question in the email that you sent, Dave. First of all, thanks for the email. It was lovely. We absolutely do not write you off, and we're always open to dialogue, and that's kind of why we're here today. I do really appreciate that email. That was really, really nice. Unexpected, but very happy for it.
Well, as I said, I appreciate you taking the time to read and offer your opinions on my comics, so I'm more than happy to do this.
Yeah, so it sounded like your intention was not racist, so we were kind of curious of what you were thinking when you did those comics.
Yeah. Well, initially, as the problem with the whole setting was I wanted that into the ISIS terrorist, that sort of thing is what it boils my blood a bit. At the time I wrote that, there's a lot of bad news about what they were doing over in Iraq and Syria. Mm-hmm. It was on the news, and I'm pretty unable to do anything about it. So I wanted to write a story which highlights the bad things that the so-called Islamic State was doing. Mm-hmm. I wrote a story and I presented it to a friend of mine who thought that I may be treading on thin ice with some of the things I was writing in regards to some sort of crazy lunatic may decide to rock my house with a Molotov cocktail or something. So I decided to try and that's when it became ISOL, as in the Martians, the people from outer space. Mm-hmm. So that sort of made it, turned it away from having a go at real terrorists to having a go at a fictitious terrorist.
Yeah, well, and terrorists have attacked people over cartoons before, so I can see where your friend was coming from. But I guess I can understand that. It's just, but then what drove the choice to portray them the way that you did? The kind of ape-like faces.
Well, yeah, I suppose I considered that the Planet of the Apes, something like that, it's
Planet of the Apes, yeah.
That sort of thing, and I thought, well, that's easy enough to do. I can do that. That said, when I did show it to other people, they sort of pointed out that, that's probably not too kosher either. Sort of was in the process of getting it printed and had to sort of follow it through.
I see. You're so far along already. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So instead of pulling the plug on the whole thing, I thought, well, some people don't see it that way. Some people see it another way, because I had other people say, oh, it's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. So I thought, oh, we'll go with it.
I see. Mulele, what's your take on this?
Well, I wanted to ask, if given your experience at this point, would you change anything about the story, or would you print it again as it is?
Well, yes, I think the point you made, Mulele, about changing the garb to spacesuits or something along those lines, I could probably still keep the facial features the way they are, just put them in spacesuits, and then there's no link to a particular racial group or community within this world we live in. And as regards with the drinking sort of thing and all that, that would probably alleviate that problem. Sure. I'd hope it would.
Yeah, and I think you could still make your point without, suggesting the same, clothes and everything as actual Islamic terrorists, because that I thought I was interested by the one who was so he didn't care about the crusade anymore, as the words that were used in the comic. He just wanted to go home and see his family. And I wouldn't be surprised if some terrorists in various places, not just Islamic ones, actually felt that way. Maybe they were afraid to say anything to their peers or their boss, but I can imagine some of them must feel that way.
Well, yeah, that adds a bit of a human side to them. A bit of it shows them not as just being purely animal, or they do have their own feelings, and it puts a bit of people may understand them, that they have two sides. They're not all bad, and that might be the same with terrorists in real life. I'm sure they have moments where their family think they're really nice people. And then there's moments when they get out with their mates and they've got a rifle in their hand, and they're out to cause trouble, and they're a different person then.
I see.
Sorry, just to kind of clarify something here. Terrorism is basically, according to the dictionary, unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. And by this definition, by far the biggest terrorist that we have now, biggest terrorist group that we have now, is the U.S. government. And so I have to look at the word terrorist and the idea of terrorism as completely removed from any kind of religious or specific political ideology or race. And so it could be a gorilla in a spacesuit, or it could be a cat with 5 tails. It really doesn't matter what it is, but it uses this tactic to be considered a terrorist. And in some ways, you could say that the terrorist part of it, I mean, if we're really talking about aliens, is simply for the fact that it has a political aim. Otherwise, the movie Aliens by James Cameron would be basically military fighting terrorists. So in that sense, it really could be anything. It's just the political ideology that you're dealing with.
Yeah, and I think also maybe because I sort of deviated away a little bit from my original script, maybe it's getting away from, it could just be a war between rival factions or whatever, rather than terrorism at the moment, because they haven't actually attacked anyone or done anything except that first introduction to them when they blew up that ship in the that was orbiting Mars, in the first introduction to them, if you remember.
Yeah.
The two fellas in the salvage ship were orbiting Mars, and that was the first act, I suppose, of terrorism, where they actually blew up a ship from Earth. But this story, as Mullally said a number of times throughout a couple of interviews, critiques, it not necessarily a science fiction story. It could be in the jungles of Vietnam, it could be in the Afghanistan hills, or it's basically not science fiction. It's more just war stories.
But even though I say it's not a science fiction story per se, it's not to take anything away from the story that you're making. I still think it's fine. Star Wars is a non-science fiction science fiction story. I mean, really. But to be honest, it was good up until a point anyway. I don't know how you feel about episode 9, but
Star Wars. Yeah.
Basically, anything goes with science fiction stories these days.
Yeah.
It's just not hard science fiction like Asimov or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. I often, when I'm selling my comics, I say, look, this is a science fiction title. These couple of stories are science fiction, but I'm not smart enough to write real science fiction. So these are basically war stories in space.
Yeah.
Yes. How much does that comic draw on your own military experience?
Probably a lot, because I tend to write a lot of things on what I know about, which what they always say, you should write about what you know.
Mhm.
And that's tend to be why I write the things I write. I write about war stories. I write about Australian outback or Australian history. They're the two main sort of things I like to get into.
Yeah, and I remember we were talking about the first issue of Amazing Tales, and how there were some stories in that were more kind of history based, and we particularly liked the art in those stories. It seemed a little bit more, I don't know, kind of detailed. You're approaching those stories a little differently when you draw them?
Well, I don't know if I am. Maybe it's something that comes out subconsciously. I'm not too sure. Maybe because my art style is, when I started drawing with pen and ink, I was inspired by a fellow named Norman Lindsay. He's an Australian artist, cartoonist, and he could do amazing things with a bottle of ink and a pen. And so he inspired me to start drawing. And so a lot of my stuff about Australia may have more cross-hatching, more shading, hatching, that sort of thing. In an endeavour to emulate what Australian historical black and white art was like. Yeah. And I'm still a great admirer of all the Australian, British and American. I've found out I've got a couple of books on American and British old-time illustrators. Trying to think of a couple of names. Cole would be one. He's an American, I think. I can't think of any more. But
Okay.
They are. I am inspired by their work.
I see. Muleo, you have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, about the artwork, there seems to be like a variety of styles and techniques that you employ. I mean, it's all recognizably your work, but for example, in the first issue, I think it was the last story called Ringer's Yarn. That art style is amazing and seems very, very advanced compared to the previous stories in the same book. Can you talk a little bit about the variance in these art styles?
When I put that first one together, I had an idea. I wanted to look like there was a team of people working on it. It wasn't on me Pat Malone. I had a couple of people helping me, but it was all me. And as a result, I did different things. For example, I think that the story, the Ringer's Yarn that you're talking about, I had drawn on A4 size paper. Was using just a pen and a dip pen with Indian ink. The same was done for the Runaway, which was another the story of Sir Sidney Kidman. That was done with pen and ink, but it was on A3 size paper, so it's twice the size. So you get variation in your line weights and that then. The other two stories was a similar thing. The first one, which was the Dropship 15 story, the Office Romance, that was done on A3, the larger size format, with brush and dip pen as well, so a mix of the two. And the next story was the Vietnam story, Bad Karma, and that was done on the smaller size, A4, and it was done a lot with the brush and the dip pen as well. So I was striving to get a bit of variety in my in the output, and I did have a couple of people comment on it. Some people didn't comment on anything part of that aspect, but there have been people who have mentioned that there's different styles.
Why did you vary the paper size?
Well, I think there's a way of, for one thing, it's a bit quicker sometimes to do it on a smaller page. You can cover the ground a bit quicker, and also it makes it look a bit different. You're not shrinking it down to fit the comic size page in. You're almost doing it, you're drawing almost one-to-one, almost. The prints.
Yeah, I can see that makes Bad Karma feel a little more kind of cartoony because it's not shrunken down so much. Yeah.
A few people have mentioned that I draw a bit cartoony, and I like to do that. There's parts of the story where I may do quite a strive for a bit of realism in proportion, body proportion, facial proportions, and that sort of thing. But there are times, quite often, when I really like to animate the character, and that to get them, if they're shouting, to have an enlarged mouth, when they're running, to stretch the proportions or their balance right out of just to really get that action in or movement into the drawing and the help tell the story.
Coming up, more of our talk with David Dye. I'm continuing to republish classic episodes of Deconstructing Comics in reverse order, unlocked by our patrons' generous support. This week's classic episode, number 73 from April 30th, 2007, features a comparison of Marvel's Civil War 7 to Vertigo's DMZ Volume 2. The classic episodes can be found on our Facebook and Twitter feeds by clicking on the earliest months listed on the left sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com, or in publicly available posts on our Patreon page or in the Patreon smartphone app. Classic episodes have been unlocked up to number 46. You can help unlock more by pledging. Check out all our goals and help us reach them at patreon.com/deconcomics.
I crave superheroic content. Let's see what's on.
I want you to tell all your friends about me.
What are you?
I'm Batman.
Nah, don't think so.
I'm Batman.
Not really what I'm looking for.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.
Ugh, absolutely not.
This is Robin the Boy Wonder. I'm Batman.
Aha, now that's more like it.
If you see Adam West as the one true Batman, then this is the podcast for you. Tune in every other Thursday on your favorite podcast source to hear Tim and Paul discuss the 1966 series and everything connected with it. What's the podcast called?
To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles.
It also seemed to me that with that final story, The Ringer's Yarn, the composition is much more measured than in the previous stories. It seems like the either the finer pens that you use or the larger sizes that you use, you're just taking a lot more time with it. It seems. It's not that I dislike the other styles. It's just that the other ones are much quicker and much more aggressive on the page. But sorry, I keep going on about this Ringer's Yarn because I like the story so much, but and the artwork is amazing. But I just wanted to ask, do you have, or rather, what is your artistic background?
Well, basically, like a lot of us, we all start off when we're kids just picking up a pencil and drawing. I'm lucky that my mother and my brothers and sisters used to always draw. We'd sit around on rainy days and at the kitchen table, and I'd learn from them how to draw because they were a lot better than I was. I was the youngest at that stage. And but then I just kept drawing, and they stopped. They stopped drawing. I kept drawing, and Mum and Dad kept encouraging me, and then I started painting. I got my sister's oil paint set when I was about 14 or something, and started doing paintings, oil paintings. And then I was just self-taught for years on that. Every now and then you might go to a lesson over the years, but I stuck with oil painting for many years. Then when I joined the army, I sort of stopped all that for a long time, maybe 10 or 15 years before I started painting again. And then every now and then I'd go to an art class or something like that. But when I was about 14 or 15 years into my army military career, I had the opportunity to transfer to a trade called Illustrator Reprographic. And that is a trade where you draw and create the posters and signs around the army base. You do photography, you do calligraphy, all that. So to get into that, I had to do a 6-month intensive illustration course, which was very thorough. And then from there, I did 14 years while I was in the army. And so that sort of, and then I did a TAFE course as well, and I actually got a diploma in visual art through the army. Studied that part-time, and that, I don't know if that helped me much with my drawing. Or that just gives you a piece of paper, really, but it made me look at a lot of different art styles and those sort of things. But mostly self-taught, I'd say.
Actually, a lot of that history kind of reflects my own history, except for the military service part, of course. But I'm also a self-taught artist. But the variance in your style is something that I've often tried to do in my own style, but have not been entirely successful, or at least I feel. Every time I draw it, it looks like something I drew. And that's all I can say about it, really. So kudos for that. You were quite successful there.
Well, I don't know how successful I am. You know what it's like. You'll draw something, but it's pretty rare that you're really 100% happy with what you do.
Yeah.
Sometimes you nail it on the head and you're pretty happy with yourself, but then you might do the next panel.
So you said you were printing up the comics, so how do you sell them?
I mostly sell at conventions when I get along to conventions. I do have a website, and we have over here in Australia, we've got a online website called Owner Indie that has been set up by a girl named Marie Moore, and she's allowed us to put our comics up there for sale. So they're pretty good for sale throughout Australia, but when you get to postage overseas and places like that, that's when it gets pretty hard. So I went to a few conventions last year, and the last two I went to in November, Supernova in Adelaide and Supernova in Brisbane, were very successful for me, and I sold, well, in Adelaide I thought I did very well. I sold most of my stock, but in Brisbane I sold all my stock, so I was really...
Great.
Yeah. Just a few more questions, if you don't mind. So far you've published just those 3 books?
No, I've got about another 3 that you haven't seen.
Oh, please do send them. Problematic or not. Yeah. But what we do talk about in future reviews of your work will be prefaced by this conversation. And so moving forward, I still want to see your work. I still want to hear what you have to say in comics. But so you've now done 6 issues of this book?
No, I've only got 3 of Amazing Tales. I've got there's one that was written by a fellow named Roger Stitson. He's a writer here who's ex-teacher, school teacher, and he wrote this comic called Cut Down. He actually wrote it as a film script for a competition. I think it was a horror film competition. It was an entry. It didn't get made into a film, so he thought, how else can he get it out to an audience? So he just came upon the idea of making a comic out of it. He rewrote the script into a comic format and asked, well, actually once he saw Amazing Tales #1 at a for sale somewhere and asked someone about it, and he contacted me and asked me if I would draw it for him. And I said, no worries, it's a good story. Why wouldn't I?
What's the page count on that?
That's a 32-page interior. Yep, 32-page story.
It's actually a lot shorter than I imagined it would be for a film script.
Yeah, well, he cut it down. It's called Cut Down, and he cut it down too. Yeah. And I've also I've got a 100-page graphic novel, which, when I think about it, that's probably the first comic I wrote and illustrated. I did that while I was still in the army. So I said I started when I got out of the army, but I actually did that one while I was in the army. It's a World War II story set in the Kokoda Track in New Guinea. Australians fighting the Japanese. It is, as I said, 100 pages, so I can send it to you. I know it might stretch your 32-page limit. But we'll see.
We say at least 30 pages, so yeah. It could be more.
And so, as far as comics go, what do you see in your future? What are you working towards?
Well, I don't know if I'm working towards anything. I'm just keeping myself off the streets and out of mischief, really. Because I'm 61 in a couple of months, and I really don't have the ticker to put in the hard yards to do work professionally, I don't think. So I don't think I'll really be chasing any contracts with Marvel or DC or any British things. So I'm quite happy to just plug away doing my own thing, self-publishing and that sort of thing.
Do you plan to do any autobiographical work?
No, not really. I don't. No, not at this stage. I haven't thought about it, actually.
I see.
It's something interesting to say.
Okay, that's about it for my questions. But Dave, do you have any questions? Anything you want to ask us?
No, well, I don't want this interview to change our relationship. When I send a comic in for a critique, I wanted it to be honest and don't think, I don't want to offend Dave. He's not too bad. I don't want to.
Yeah, I think only changes it for the better, I think.
Look, my feeling about this is that every story tells. Well, it has two ideas running through it. One is the story that it's trying to convey, but also is the story of the artist or artists that made it. It runs through all of my work. It runs through a lot of work that I see. And if I come across a story or an artist where I cannot see what they're thinking, I can't see their struggle or moment of discovery, and that's kind of a boring book. And that's kind of why I stay away from Marvel books, because I often can't see that. And so if you were working for Marvel, I probably wouldn't be too interested.
Well, I'd like to have an audience of at least one. That's good.
Well, two with two.
Two.
That's good. What was I going to say? The Amazing Tales, the first one, #1. I sent that out when I first did it, and I sent it to a couple of people to critique. And one chap, he was a critiquer and nice bloke, and he said to me in email, we just talk corresponding by email, oh, geez, I don't know if I can do a critique on that Amazing Tales #1. And I said, why is that? He said, well, it's just not good enough. I said, oh, okay, right. And he says, really, when you're selling that, you might be able to, I don't know where you'd sell it, you might be able to sell it at a carpenter's convention or a agricultural show, but other than
Jeez, that's really harsh.
Yeah, but I just had a good laugh. I really, because I'm a country boy, I like my shows. And I always get a good giggle. And I had that bloke actually came up to me at the end of last year at one of the little shows I was selling at, and introduced himself, and I said, oh, how you going? I'm glad you came up to talk to me, and he's a nice bloke, so there's no problems with it at all. So
good.
I don't mind. I don't mind a bit of honest criticism. Whatever you say, it's your opinion. Whether I agree with you or what, that's different.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say for my own bit, anything I say, harsh or sweet, is an invitation to talk about it. So, if I do say something that rubs you wrong, call us up and we'll talk about it again.
Yeah, good. Yep. Yeah, right. I'm happy for that. I put your a link to your podcast on Facebook for all my friends to watch and listen to.
Oh, okay, and great.
I got a couple of only a couple of comments saying, "Oh, geez, those blokes are a bit harsh on you, mate." And really, I listened to it a couple of times, and you weren't harsh on me at all. I don't think you were harsh at all. There's a couple of points you brought up, but you actually talked them out yourselves. Like one of them was Tim. You said you were talking about. Mullally said, "Why have the flashback scene in Fresh Meat?" And I think Tim might have said because maybe it's because you already introduced those characters previously, and that is exactly right. I'd already introduced those characters, so I wanted them to be a flashback. They'd already been part of the crew, so a flashback was what I wanted for that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another. Oh, yeah, and actually, yeah, I was really. And you had nothing but positive comments about Tar Pits of Doom. You just laughed all the time you were talking about it. It was just all. It sounded to me like you enjoyed it. You were both laughing. Not fit for work. I'm not sure what that means, but what does that mean?
It means when you're in your office, don't read it there because other people might see it and be offended.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's right. But no, I've got no problems with anything you blokes said. I can see where you're coming from, and what you said I think was true, and I can take it on board. Yeah, and I think Mullally's closing comment for that that last critique was, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like "show me more" or "it's all good," something like that. So what's wrong with that? That's good.
Well, thank you. And I am quite earnest in saying yes. Please send more.
Yeah, definitely.
No worries. Will do.
Okay, well, it's been great having you on.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Sure. Look at Dave Dye's recent work at whatsleftbooks.weebly.com. That's WOTS leftbooks.weebly, WEEBLY.com. We also invite you to join us on Patreon. Our tiers start at just $2 a month. Pledge at least $4 a month to get our Patreon-only series Spider-Man 1963 and Tim Catches Up with the MCU, where last Saturday we released our review of Avengers Infinity War. Go to patreon.com/deconcomics to join the fun. Our theme is from bensound.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, Will Weaver joins me to discuss the controversial series Second Coming by Mark Russell and Richard Pace. Is it disrespectful to Christians? What's Russell trying to say in this series? Those questions and more next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.